Welcome to another deep dive with us. This time, we're going to be doing something a little different. We're going to be diving into a Reddit post that a listener sent to us. And it's a pretty intense situation. It's about divorce and some of the really tough challenges that come up when a marriage falls apart.
Oh, yeah. Divorce is never easy, and
Yeah.
especially when it gets really contentious. There's a lot of raw emotion involved. There's a lot of legal stuff to figure out, and it can feel overwhelming for sure.
So let's jump right into this Reddit post.
Hmm.
The poster is a husband, and he's been married for 4 years. And he's basically saying that he was completely blindsided by his wife's actions. It sounds like they were talking about separating, but it was all pretty amicable, at
Yeah.
least from his perspective. And then all of a sudden she kind of like went nuclear.
Yeah, like flipped a switch, it sounds like.
Exactly.
And now he's facing the possibility of losing custody of his kids and even his home, which he says he owned before they got married. So it's a lot to process for sure.
It is. You can really feel the just the rawness of his emotions in the post, like the betrayal, the shock, the fear.
Right. It's that feeling of everything you thought you knew about your life just gets like totally upended. And that's got to be terrifying, especially when you throw in worries about becoming a weekend dad, which is something a lot of people going through divorce really fear. They don't want to lose that close connection with their children.
Absolutely. And this particular post really hit home for our listener because they're going through something very similar.
Hmm.
They're worried about the same things, custody of their kids, their financial security, their home. And just like the guy in the Reddit post, they're trying to figure out how to navigate this incredibly difficult situation.
It's tough. And from a legal standpoint, there are some specific things that really jump out from this Reddit post that are worth talking about. For example, the poster mentioned that his wife withdrew a large sum of money from their joint savings account without his consent.
Yeah, that's a big one. And a lot of the Redditors commenting on the post were outraged about that too. Is that even legal? Like, can one spouse just drain the joint account like that during a divorce?
Well, it can be a bit of a gray area, legally speaking. I mean, ethically, it's definitely questionable,
Sure.
but the legal consequences really vary from state to state. And it also depends on the specifics of the situation. For instance, how much money was withdrawn? Was it for like essential expenses, or was it just like a power move, to try to gain some leverage? So it's something that definitely needs to be addressed with an attorney to see how it might play out in court.
It definitely adds another layer of complexity on top of an already messy situation.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder about the whole issue of commingling assets, which I know can get really tricky during a divorce.
It can. And this is a perfect example of why it's so important to have a clear understanding of what's considered separate property versus marital property. Like in this case, the poster owned the house before the marriage, so you might think that would make it pretty straightforward. But he mentioned that he refinanced it a few years ago, and I'm guessing his wife was added to the title or the mortgage during that process.
Right, which probably complicates things.
It does, because when you refinance and your spouse gets added on, that can make it look like you've mixed your separate property with marital property. It's what we call commingling assets. And it can make it much harder to determine who's entitled to what when you split up.
So even though he owned the house before the marriage, the fact that he refinanced it with his wife could make it harder for him to keep it as his own separate property during the divorce.
Exactly. It's a common issue, and it highlights the importance of having a clear prenuptial agreement, or at least understanding the potential implications of any financial decisions you make during the marriage. It can save you a lot of headaches down the road.
Definitely a lesson worth learning, whether you're thinking about getting married or already are.
Uh,
And speaking of lessons, one thing that really jumped out at me from the Reddit post was all the advice people were giving him about communication. Some were saying that he should only communicate with his wife through lawyers or text messages and document every interaction like religiously, almost as if you're preparing for battle, which in a way, I guess you kind of are in a divorce, right?
Right. I mean, I can understand why people would give that advice, especially in a situation that's already gotten so contentious. You want to protect yourself and make sure you have evidence if things end up in court. You don't want to be caught off guard. And having a clear record of communication can be really helpful in that regard.
So there's definitely some logic to that approach.
There is, but it's also important to consider the potential downsides. I mean, if you're only communicating through lawyers or formal channels like text messages, it can actually escalate the conflict. It makes it harder to have like a real conversation and work towards a resolution that works for both of you.
So it's kind of a double-edged sword, right?
It can be. You have to find that balance between protecting yourself legally and not shutting down all avenues for communication.
Especially when there are children involved.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't want to create this toxic environment where everything is a battle.
Exactly. I mean, ideally, you want to find a way to resolve things as amicably as possible for everyone's sake, but especially for the kids. They're the ones who are often caught in the crossfire, and it's so important to try to shield them from as much of the conflict as you can.
It's a tough situation all around. And it's made even tougher by the fact that emotions are running so high. It's hard to think clearly when you're feeling betrayed and hurt and angry. And that's something that really comes through in this Reddit post. This guy is just raw with emotion, you know?
He is. And it's important to acknowledge those emotions. Divorce is a grieving process. You're losing a relationship, you're losing a sense of normalcy and stability, and it's okay to feel those feelings. In fact, it's important to feel them. You don't want to bottle them up because that just makes things worse in the long run.
Absolutely. So we've talked about the legal complexities of divorce. We've talked about the emotional roller coaster that it is. But what about the practical side of things? Like, what are some things that people going through divorce can do to protect themselves and their children during this really difficult time? That's something we'll explore in the next part of this deep dive. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
And that brings us back to our listener situation, because they mentioned feeling similarly blindsided by their spouse's actions, especially the withdrawal of money from their joint account.
Yeah, it was like, bam, just like that.
Yeah.
Most of that money was actually mine to begin with.
Oh, really? So it was like funds you brought into the marriage.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, that's an important detail. Obviously it's upsetting to see any money disappear from a joint account, especially without your consent. But if you can prove that you were the primary contributor to that account before the marriage and even during the marriage, that can make a big difference when it comes to dividing assets during the divorce.
So it's like, I need receipts or something.
Yeah. Well, not receipts exactly, but, bank statements, anything that clearly shows how much you put into that account. Documentation is key in these situations, anything that can back up your claims.
Got it. I'm already kind of freaking out and gathering all the financial records I can find.
I bet. It can feel overwhelming for sure, but honestly, the more organized you are, the better. And your attorney can help you figure out which documents are the most relevant to your case.
That's good to know. I'm meeting with my lawyer next week, so I'll definitely make sure I have everything ready.
Good. Preparation is key,
It is. And speaking of my case, my situation with the house is a bit different from the Reddit poster. We bought our home together after we got married.
Oh, okay. So it's not like separate property that you brought into the marriage.
Right. But I've been the one paying the mortgage pretty much this whole time since we've been together.
So you're the primary breadwinner.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, well, that's important too, because even when a property is acquired during the marriage, the court will take into account the financial contributions of each spouse. So the fact that you've been the primary earner and have been shouldering the mortgage payments, that definitely strengthens your position if you're hoping to, walk away with a greater share of the home's equity.
Okay, that makes me feel a little bit better.
Good.
But it's tough because on the one hand, I don't want to fight with my spouse over every little thing, especially since we have kids.
I get it.
But at the same time, I need to protect myself too and make sure my financial future is secure.
You do. It's a classic divorce dilemma. You're trying to balance your own needs with this desire to, keep things amicable, especially when there are children involved.
It's a constant struggle. I feel like I'm walking on eggshells all the time.
I can imagine.
Trying to figure out the right way to handle everything. And, the Reddit poster talked about feeling the same way too. He's obviously worried about becoming a weekend dad, which is something I'm terrified of too. But he also seems to be trying to figure out how to handle this whole situation without making things worse,
I think a lot of people in his position feel that way. It's like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. But one thing that's important to remember is that in most cases, the court prefers to award 50-50 custody unless there are really compelling reasons not to.
So like unless one parent is deemed unfit or something like that.
Right. Basically, the court operates on the assumption that both parents should have equal rights and responsibilities when it comes to their children. So the fact that his wife has been a stay-at-home mom doesn't automatically give her an advantage when it comes to custody.
Okay, that's good to know because I've heard so many stories about how stay-at-home parents always get primary custody.
It used to be more common, yeah. But courts are increasingly recognizing the importance of both parents having significant roles in their kids' lives. It's not about who's been home more. It's about what's in the best interest of the child. And that often means a balanced and shared parenting plan.
That makes sense. This whole process is honestly making my head spin. I'm trying to keep my emotions in check, but it's just so much to process.
Oh, I believe it. Divorce is emotionally draining for sure. And then you layer on all this legal stuff and it can feel like you're navigating a maze.
It totally does. And it can be really isolating, too.
Yeah, that's why it's so important to have a strong support system during this time.
Hmm.
Don't be afraid to reach out to friends, family, a therapist, anyone you trust who can listen and offer support.
Yeah, I'm working on building that support system. It's hard, though,
I know, but you're not alone, I promise. A lot of people go through this, you know? And while you're taking care of yourself emotionally, don't underestimate the importance of having a good lawyer in your corner. They can handle the legal stuff, advise you on your rights, and help you make informed decisions every step of the way.
That's really reassuring. It just feels like there are so many unknowns right now.
I hear you. And that's why we're here to talk about it and try to shed some light on things.
You mentioned earlier that the length of the marriage can play a role in decisions about alimony.
It can, yeah. It's
Mhm.
one of the factors they consider.
Well, the Reddit poster was married for 4 years, the same as me. So how does that typically factor into things?
Well, in many states, shorter marriages like yours typically result in either shorter term alimony or no alimony at all.
Okay, that's somewhat reassuring because, like I said, I've always been the primary earner.
Right, right. That's definitely a factor. But it's not just about how long you were married or who made more money. The court also looks at the financial needs and the earning capacity of each spouse. So if your spouse is capable of supporting themselves, it's less likely that alimony will be awarded.
So even though there's some general guidelines, it really comes down to the specifics of each situation.
Exactly. And that's why it's so crucial to consult with an attorney who specializes in family law in your state. They can look at the details of your case, assess your finances, and give you a much clearer picture of how alimony might apply to your situation.
Okay, I'm starting to understand a little bit better how all these pieces fit together.
Good, good. And that's really the point of these deep dives, right? To take a real life situation like this Reddit post and use it as a springboard to explore these complex issues and hopefully provide some useful information and insights to our listeners who might be going through something similar.
It's amazing how much we've covered just from this one Reddit post.
I know, right? It's a testament to how much these personal stories can resonate with people and how much we can learn from each other's experiences.
Absolutely. So we started with a Reddit post that honestly felt pretty overwhelming at first,
It was a doozy for sure.
but we've managed to unpack some pretty heavy legal concepts, explore the emotional challenges of divorce, and even touch on alternative approaches like mediation.
We have. It's been a pretty comprehensive deep dive.
It has. So for those of you listening who are finding these deep dives helpful and informative, we encourage you to subscribe to our podcast, Voices of the Soul. We release new episodes every week, and we cover a wide range of topics related to personal growth, relationships, and navigating life's ups and downs.
And if you're looking for more support and a sense of community, check out the Shauna Palage YouTube channel. You'll find lots of great resources and inspiration there to help you through tough times.
Remember, you're not alone. Divorce is hard, but with the right support and information, you can get through it. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time. So we've talked about the legal stuff, the emotional roller coaster, all that. But you mentioned something earlier that I think is worth exploring a bit more. Mediation. What exactly is that, and how does it work?
Yeah, mediation is a really interesting option that a lot of people don't even know about. It basically involves working with a neutral third party, a mediator, who helps you and your spouse communicate and try to reach agreements on things like, property division, spousal support, child custody, all that.
So instead of going to court and having a judge decide everything, you're trying to work things out yourselves with the help of this mediator.
Exactly. And it can be a much less adversarial process than going to court, and often less expensive, too.
I can see how that would be less stressful. But what if things have already gotten really nasty between the couple? Is mediation even an option at that point?
It can be. I mean, a good mediator is trained to help people communicate even when they're not seeing eye to eye. They can help facilitate those tough conversations and guide you towards compromises that you might not be able to reach on your own.
So they're kind of like a referee almost.
In a way, yeah. But they're also there to help you come up with solutions that work for both of you, not just to tell you what to do.
Right. Because ultimately, you and your spouse are the ones who have to live with the decisions that are made.
Exactly. And especially when you have kids, you want to be able to co-parent effectively moving forward. Mediation can help lay the groundwork for that.
So even if a couple is really at odds, it's still worth considering mediation.
It's definitely worth exploring. I mean, in some cases, courts even require couples to try mediation before they can go to trial because it can be so effective at de-escalating conflict and helping people reach agreements that they can actually live with.
That makes sense. It's kind of like a last-ditch effort to see if you can work things out before you go nuclear.
It can be, but it can also be a really positive experience. I've seen couples come out of mediation feeling much better about the situation, even if they weren't sure about it going in.
So it's definitely something to keep in mind.
For sure. It's not the right solution for everyone, but it's an option worth considering.
This whole deep dive has been so eye-opening. We started with that Reddit post, which felt so intense and relatable, and now we've covered so much ground, the legal stuff, the emotional stuff, even alternative approaches like mediation.
Yeah, and it all started with one person's story.
It did. And that's the power of sharing these experiences, right?
Yeah.
Even though every divorce is unique, there are common threads and challenges that so many people can relate to.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes these duck dives so valuable. We're taking these real life situations and using them as a way to explore these complex issues and hopefully provide some guidance and support to our listeners who might be going through something similar.
And speaking of support, for those of you listening who are finding these deep dives helpful, we encourage you to subscribe to our podcast, Voices of the Soul. We release new episodes every week covering a wide range of topics related to personal growth, relationships, and navigating life's challenges.
And if you're looking for even more resources and a supportive community, check out the Shauna Pulge YouTube channel. You'll find lots of great information and inspiration there to help you through tough times.
Remember, you're not alone. Divorce is tough, but with the right support and information, you can get through it. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.